Regarding knitting, I've done textile arts for years and years and years. Knitting, I think that was an that counts. I've done, thank you for the follow. I've done knitting for, oh golly, since 1993. So it's been a number of years. I like knitting. It is one of the most popular and well-known of the textile arts. So it is the process of using 2 or more needles to form a series of interconnected loops. Oh, you guys couldn't see me hold up the needles, but that's okay. You can see how the interconnected loops here are, they go in and out of each other, and that is the important aspect of what knitting is. It's those loops. So thank you for the follow. I will show you guys some samples. Let's go back to the laptop webcam, and I'll show you guys some of what I've done. I've done this hat. In fact, I have to hide my notes here so I can see, I can see if it's big high enough. This hat I did 20 years ago. Sorry, it's backwards for me. I did this 20 years ago, and it's still one of my favorite hats. So there's that one. This one I did a year or so ago to go along with the Shetland Sheep and Wool Festival, and they had this most adorable hat pattern. I just loved it, and my friend and I did this hat pattern as our group project together. Then I've also done some interlock. Good night, tellers. Oh, we're at a stretch check. Okay. Breathe, check, and stretch check. Okay, stretch. Thank you. That actually really does help me because it also makes me sit up. So anyway, we were doing this as another project. We learned to do what's called interlock, and you do each little square, and then you do another square and another square. So this is all one actual piece of yarn. Then one of my favorite ever things is the mittens from my friend from Finland. She does these her own patterns, and I bought them from her because I wanted to support her art, and they're awesome warm mittens because they have all these little threads in the back that basically makes a second layer and makes it a little bit warmer. So that's just some examples of what knitting looks like, but you can see, I guess on here is a little bit bigger, you can see the loops, the lines of loops, and that is what defines what knitting is. So back to my notes here. Knitting was thought to have originated in Egypt and traveled from there to the rest of the world. It's done truly all over the world. Each area has its own patterns. So grab a couple books here. Again, I'll have to minimize my notes so you can see. You can, there's Fair Isle knitting, and there's similar variations done throughout the world with, say, Norwegian or Swedish patterns. They all use the 2-color patterns. There's a lot of different 2-color patterns throughout the world, and each area, like I said, has its own variants and its own styles and patterns. There's not just flat though, you can have very textured work. Let's see if I can find, see if you guys can see that. It's called cabling, and it's very common in the British Isles. Yes, you did see the Norwegian Mittens book. I was fortunate enough to actually meet the gals who wrote the Norwegian Mittens book and the Swedish Mittens book, and got it signed. So, Well, they must not have signed this one. I think they signed the other one. They signed one of them for me. So, this is the Norwegian mittens and gloves. This is the Celtic collection by Alice Starmore. I've got a lot more books. I just didn't want to overwhelm you guys. And the Alice Starmore book of Feral Knitting and the Swedish Hand Knits book. These are just some of my favorites. Then if you're learning knitting, where did my other one go? Oh, here it went. If you're learning knitting, this is a really, really handy book because it has, you know, any term you need to look up, it's in here and with pictures. So, knit one, purl two. Yes, that is the joke, but I hate that particular pattern of ribbing. It's awful. It's really awful because it looks bad. So it's my personal pet peeve. So back to my notes here. There we go. Oh, you guys might want to see a few historic examples. So if we go over, these are some of the oldest pieces of knitting that are available. But you can see that they're pretty complicated with 2 color work at least, if not, and then some of them have 3. So this is obviously not the oldest knitting. It's just the oldest pieces that we've been able to find intact. So this one on the left is stored in the Textile Museum. These are all cotton socks found in Egypt. And the oldest dating one here is from somewhere between 1000 AD to 12,000 AD. So it's pretty old, but not as old as knot binding is. Oh, I'm so glad that you got to stick around. Thank you. I'm glad you find it interesting. I hope to bring some of the history and things that you can utilize in your worlds. Do I know how common knitting was in certain periods of time? I have a, where was it? History of knitting. Was it this one? No. I have an article that I can share with you guys in my stream notes later that had a really brief history of knitting and talked about how popular it became, especially in the United States, like around the 1930s and 1940s, where people had to make their own things because they couldn't afford to make them. So knitting became very, very popular. But as particular time periods, I really, off the top of my head, I don't know. So, Siobhan says, no hands. I can't knit without hands. I can knit without looking, but I can't knit without hands. So, Very Sexy says, 3 cultures in my world that are known for their neat clothing, so it's nice to get more ideas. Lots of interesting clothes. This is part of why I wanted to do the textile stream, so that there could be more textiles and people aren't just going, oh, they wove it. They can tell, you know, what kind of injuries people would have and things like this. Yes, my first textile stream was nail binding, and I did put it up on YouTube, so you guys, if we need to, I can share that later. Sharon Beatty says, I don't think we give enough historical makers enough credit. I truly think so too, because a lot of times they put their heart and soul into their work, and sometimes destroyed their bodies or their hands specifically in order to make these beautiful works of art. So I really do think we should give them more credit. So, oh, if you would add nail binding to your world, I would be totally thrilled, Meladaman. So Akimoto says, watched yesterday 2 people play the oldest playable board game known, the Royal Game of Ur. Oh, very neat. That would be really cool. That would be really, really cool. Okay, we talked about how it's been done all over the world. I've shown you guys a couple of really old historical examples. I'm next going to show you, and hopefully I have my camera set up quite right. And I got to... So I have a little bit of knitting on here. Can you guys see this? show you guys the two basic stitches and what they look like. So a knit stitch looks like this, where you can see the loops coming out of each other. Here's one, here's another, and here's another. In fact, I'll try to put it up closer. Thank you for the follow. And then this is purling. But the funny thing about knitting and purling is if you turn it over, this was the knitting side, and now you can see it looks like a purl side. And this was the purled side, and it looks like a knitting side. So knitting and purling are the opposite of each other. Can you guys see those stitches? I hope it's not blowing out on us as far as the light. So I'm going to go back to my notes here. I think I'm going to put my notes up on another screen just a second here, because then I don't have to hop back and forth so much. Okay, so, and I'm just going to do this really quick. This is not a learn to knit. If you want to learn to knit, I can help you guys find examples, but okay. So for a knit stitch, you stick one needle inside the loop from left to right, and you wrap the yarn around the back and bring it in. So you create another loop, and I'll do a couple of these for you guys. So then you get your knitted texture. Then if you want to do a purl, you go in from right to left and you wrap the yarn around. So as far as tools go, you need, bare minimum, you need needles, pointy sticks with a pointy end here, a pair of scissors and some yarn, and usually a small tapestry needle so that you can weave in the ends and it's not sticking out and causing problems. So I will catch up on questions here while we're transitioning. Okay, Chick Norris. Okay, Agimoto says 5000 BC. Wow, that is a really old game. Chick Norris 808 says, that's the best part. I grew up in a family of textile artists. My mother does knit, crochet, and sewing. Her mother did all of those things plus needlepoint and quilting. I can knit and crochet and also Native American beading work. Wow. What I love about this stream is that you're giving historical context to the craft, which helps so much with world building. And that is my hope, to give you guys not just the historics, but what it feels like, what it looks like, and in, you know, some cases what it smells or tastes like. So I hope that we can help you guys as world builders and authors to add more of this to your worlds. Siobhan, the writer, says, I think my headquarters article is going to be a barn for the Spinners Guild. That would be awesome. I look forward to reading it. Okay, as far as needles go, again, I said you need at least 2 pointy sticks. Sometimes, grab another project here so you guys can see, you can have more than one set. I've got two sets here, so it would basically be like 4 needles. You can have 4 or more. I've seen sets of 5 needles. In fact, I'll show you guys some of my knitting needles, and I've got a lot of different materials in here. So we've got plastics and wood and metal, sets of 5, so I could do knitting of the round. And wood, bamboo, they can be made out of ivory, shell, steel, aluminum, casein, which is like a milk product, glass. They can be made out of all sorts of things. RPG Dinosaur Bob says, can we lick it? Janet wants to know. She always does ask this, yes. You could. And I would be careful. If it's a fresh dyed item, I would really not do that, because some of the dyes, especially the natural dyes, if you mix them with some of the mordants, like chrome, you don't want to be eating that. That's a heavy metal. It's a bad thing to eat, okay? Siobhan says, It starts with the shearing of the sheep. Yes, it does. And it's just a haircut for the sheep, by the way. There's no cruelty involved if you have a good shearer. Sharon Beatty says, I'm working with DPNs at the moment. 4. Good job. Are you making socks or what are you making? Because I do a lot of socks. In fact, I have one of my project bags here. I can show you guys. I do a little bit of lace knitting, but here is one of my projects. So I'm not doing double points, I'm doing 2 circulars. But it's just a really simple lace pattern that I don't have to think about. Most of my knitting has to be super simple and brainless because I knit when I need to not think. Baby jumper sleeves, cute! So I showed you guys some of the needles, the ones I generally like to use, and it just depends on what you have access to, what you have money for, what you were given. I like to use the ones that are connected. I just find them convenient, but some people really hate them. It just depends on what you like. They don't actually have to be round either. Some of the new ones coming out are square. I don't know if you can really see that, but these are squares. It's kind of hard to see. Anyway, these are squares, and I really, really like them because I find that my knitting doesn't slip off of them, and I have fewer dropped stitches. So, oh, and I didn't talk about that. I should probably tell you some of the benefits and negatives of knitting. I love knitting because you can create a lot of different textures. You can create outright pictures with it. But if one of the negatives is if you drop a stitch, let's pretend we dropped this one, then suddenly I have a hole in my knitting, and it can be kind of tricky if it's all undone to redo. So that's one of the negatives. Also, it's a blessing and a curse. It comes out very easily, unlike null binding did. So I will catch up on comments here. Sharon Beatty says, I saw those and wasn't sure about them. I will probably be replacing a lot of my needles in my collection eventually with the square ones because I really, really like them. Chick Norris says, I've got a character who is a masterful lace maker. I would love to learn more about that. I am not a lace person, but I know some people who do lace. So if I can continue this series, maybe I can have some people doing tatting or lace knitting or needle tatting. Those are all, and there's bobbin lace also. So tatting is, here, let me see if I can find you a real quick thing on it. So it uses, see if I can grab him. They have needle tatting. It uses a little shuttle and you make tiny little knots with it. So you use the shuttle, make a knot, tie it off, and you use loops and then makes knots around the loops. It's really neat, but it was a little complicated for me. I have a friend who does bobbin lace and her classes always sell out. It is hard, but it is amazing. So, okay, catching up here. The different shaped needles can also change the shape of the stitches. No, they don't. The size changes the size of the stitches, but it doesn't change the shape. Proper lace making is so hard. I'd agree. This is part of why I don't do it. It has to be pretty simple for me. Melinda says, I knit super tight. The square ones makes it much easier to knit for you. That's good to know too, which I think I've noticed with my friend Jackie, who I do a project with every year. Suppose they could double up as some kind of weapon, a thief's tool. Plots and more plots. I have a story to go with that. Before I had my children, I would ride in what we called the van pool, which was a whole group of us going to the same place because it was cheaper to group together and drive than it was to drive half an hour out of town. So I would knit along the way, and if we hit a bump, I'd always get these weird looks, especially if I had 4 needles on my knitting project. The guys would be like, don't stab me. It really could be a weapon if you had to. I would hate to break my needles though, so it'd have to be pretty desperate. Bobbin lace looks impossible. There's patterns to it. So I don't think it's impossible. We just have to figure out the patterns. Redeemed question. Do you have recommendations for books or other resources to learn about the histories of fabric and textiles? I've been looking but have had mixed results. I think there are, but I don't know off the top of my head. I will look for that. I'm writing it down, so if, as I'm pausing, I'm actually writing here. Rex for textiles fabric. I know there was a book put out about like the Viking Age textiles, and then there was one, I think it was called Women's Work or something like that. I will look those up though. Trying to think of where I should share them. I can probably share them in the resources links in World Anvil for you guys, okay? Stretch check, good, and I was hunching over, so thank you for the stretch check. Okay, back to our notes here. Da, da, da. So in order to start knitting, and I should probably get our webcam back here. And where did my needles go? You have to get the yarn with loops onto your needles, okay? So I'm going to show you guys, there's a zillion different ways to cast on. I usually use one, and I can't even remember what this is called, but it's a stretchy cast on. I like to use it for my socks. So I do a lot of socks. When my children were small, there's a name for this and I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head. When my children were small, I used to wait for them in my truck, and I would knit a pair or 2 of socks every year just while I was waiting. So here are some of the socks I knitted, just so you can know sort of what and this is all pretty much the same pattern. I don't want to vary in patterns. I don't want complicated. But these were all commercial yarns, and these were hand spun yarns. The hand spuns were made with wools that actually shrunk, so they're basically slippers now because they've shrunk down quite a bit. They're a little bit tight on my feet. So. Oh yes, this is the long tail cast on. Thank you, Sharon Beatty. This is the long tail cast on, and there's entire books, and my copy is on Kindle, but there are entire books of cast-ons, which is putting it on the needles, and then cast-offs, where you take the fabric off the needles and let it be. Yeah, there's a German twisted cast, and there's 50 zillion. There's even one called the Chinese waitress cast-on. So. Because somebody learned it from a Chinese waitress. So there's 50 zillion different ways. As long as you get the loops on here and it's as stretchy as you need it, that's the important thing. Some people just simply put a loop on their needle and do that over and over. As long as you get loops on here, that's the important part, okay? So, and I did a really fast demonstration of knitting, but I will try to get up close. It's hard to, there we go. So you guys can see this a little bit closer. I'm going to actually put on a few more stitches so it contrasts with the needle a little better. So you guys can see it up there. there. The green contrasts better than the yellow. So you just, and the first stitches are always harder than later on. The first ones are a little bit tighter for me. So this is knitting and purling. And you can do it from both sides too. So if I wanted to knit holding the yarn on the other side, and one is Continental and the other is English. I'm trying to, okay, Continental is where you hold your yarn in the left. English is where you hold your yarn in the right. I had to learn to do both because I wanted to do two-color knitting. So I learned to do both so I could have two strands held at once. And there's rings that will hold two strands of yarn. But it just depends on what you want to do. And here's a couple purlings with the English pick and throw method. So, and it just depends. So, catching up on comments. Just realized the article I'm working on right now is about clothes. Oh, hey, bonus. If you can't knit Continental, it just depends on what you want to do. You know, I chose to learn that because it was easier for me than trying to switch between strings for two colors of yarn. It just was driving me crazy. There's also a Norwegian way to do knitting, but I haven't learned that, so I can't show you guys. But there's a lot of different ways. As long as you get the loops within the loops, that's the important part, and they are twisted. There's also, just a real quick, because I didn't really get to show increases and decreases much in the null binding, but to do an increase, you have to add another stitch. So you can't exactly stick your yarn back in there and pull up another loop. It just doesn't work very well. So some people will knit in the front and the back of the stitch. Some people will pull up one from the row before, but as long as you get another loop in there, that will be your increase. Decreases, you can knit two together. You can do what's called the slip knit, where you turn the stitches around so your decrease will lean to a different side, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this one's leaning this way and this one's leaning to the left. So each decrease is just a little bit different. So that's basically the knitting demo. But if you think about how needles were made, since a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them were round, you can to make your needles, you can turn them. They could be carved historically. They probably would have been carved, or they would have had a simple foot-powered lathe. So I'll turn the laptop webcam on again so you guys can. So they would have probably had a foot-powered lathe with that they would have made these as round as possible. They could do some pretty accurate stuff with hand-powered tools and foot-powered tools. Oh, you use that for thumbs on gloves. I have not made gloves. I've only done mittens. I don't have my mittens here, but I've done mittens, and I hate doing thumbs. So. Here, let's see if I can have to copy the link for you guys. If you're curious, we'll go back to Chrome here. There's in Piecework magazine, they had a make your own knitting needles. And I will put that into the links. What I'm hoping to do is after this, I didn't have time beforehand because I've been doing a whole bunch of stuff for the ASC, but I'm hoping to type up my null binding notes and my knitting notes here and put those on my author website so that people can reference them and they aren't just in my Evernote. Mila Diamond says, "Oh no, another hobby." That's the wonderful but evil aspect of having friends who are high fiber artists, because we share our hobbies and everybody knows something that the other people don't, and we share, and I have way more hobbies because of my textile art friends than I ever thought I would, and it's dangerous. I don't get to do everything all the time. But Piecework had a nice little how to make your own knitting needles with, I think she used, a small dowel. So you can make your own. It just depends on what you want to do. So let's see, go back to that webcam and pull up my notes again. So I'll recap how yarn is made, and I'm thinking I'll do a spinning demo next before Kumihimo, even though Kumihimo was requested. I have to talk to a friend of mine, and she's been super busy because she's the one that taught me how to do Kumihimo, and she knows it much better than I do. So Sharon Beatty says, would sizing be hard? I think they would be your special knitting needles. You might just have to kind of find a knitting needle sizer and put it in there and see what size it was, or those are your special things that you don't need to work with a gauge. Melinda Almond says, I had like 1 million knitting needles I inherited from my grandma, but now I want to make more. I would love to see them if you make some. Barry Saxey says, I'm a quilter and my friend does apparel. She is learning draping and now she is learning how to quilt. And I want to, yes, it is addictive, isn't it? Okay, back to yarn. So I'm going to pull up some yarns here. Back to that one so you guys can see. Yarns can be, as long as you can have a single thread, you can have whatever type of fiber. So I have a cotton fiber one here. This is a wool, but it's a boucle, so it's bumpy. Here's a very fine lace or sock weight wool yarn that a friend actually dyed for me. You can have a very thick wool yarn. I'm just kind of pulling these randomly out of the box. So you can have, here's another textured one, but it's visually textured, so it's like a tweed. That's the word I was looking for. So you can, I just love the little speckles in there because it gives the material a really interesting look. You can have single ply, which it would just tear apart really easily, but it makes really bulky, soft, fun stuff. Or you can have multiple plies, and you can. This is one I'd spun. You can see the multiple plies in there, the different colors. So there's a dark turquoise and a light turquoise there. So what happens is when you're spinning the yarn, the twist holds everything together, and if you ply it, you put two pieces of yarn that kind of untwist onto each other and hold each other together. So you can have cotton yarn, you can have hair fibers like wool, alpaca, llama, dog in some cases, casein. This yarn is actually made from corn fibers. A friend of mine makes it. He's from Nebraska, and it's so soft. It's amazingly soft, and it gets softer as you wash it. Oh, did I have anything else? I don't have any linen on me, but linen has an amazing silky texture after it's washed. So there's just so many types of yarn out there. It can be really addictive to try to everything, and then pretty soon you have a stash beyond your life expectancy. So Barry Sexy says, spinning demo would be cool. I've been reading Tamara Pierce's Circle of Magic series, so it's made me interested in spinning. Cool. I have a wheel, and I can show you guys what. Switch here so I'm not just seeing my hands. I can show you guys what it's like to use a wheel, and I can show you guys what it's like to use a spindle, which they would have used much earlier in history before the wheels. So I would love to be able to do that for you guys. It's one of my favorite things. I'll have to figure out how to get a bigger area. So, but that's my hope for next Tuesday. Well, Thomas says, I need to find out where my yarn stash is hidden. Oh, yeah, losing your yarn stash is bad. I had a whole bunch of fiber samples and all of my old knitting samples, and I don't know where they are, and I was crushed when I was looking for them for today. Well, says, Sharon Beatty says, my yarn stash, I keep looking at it and thinking, I need more than I have. Yeah, it's dangerous. Well, says, my mom knit a blanket for her cat with her dog yarn from her mastiff. Wow, cool. A friend of mine, her dog had passed away, and she had saved a lot of the hair from combing it every day and made a rug out of it. So, I'm glad that other people think this spinning demo might be cool. I have to work out some technicalities. So, I would love to make a braided rug too. I have not tried that. That's one of the things I want to try. There are some really cool classes on braided rugs. Okay, let's get into the writing aspects as far as world building and being an author go. For feel and sight, you're going to have the brush of the yarn as it goes over your thumb and in your hand. You're going to have the different textures of different yarns, if they're soft or if they're more coarse. The finer, thinner the yarn, the hair, especially in the hair type yarns, you're going to have usually softer. Then the thicker, coarser ones are usually like relegated to like rugs and stuff. But the finer yarns pill more. They get, I don't know if there's any on here. I guess there is some on here. You can kind of see the little bumpy there. That, it's because she used a very soft, fine yarn, and they pill more. If you use a more rugged, not as soft yarn, it will hold up and not pill as much. So it just depends on what you're making your item for. It's like a lot of the sweaters will be made of a slightly less soft yarn so that they stand up. Chuck Norris says, I've heard of making braided rugs with t-shirts but never socks. Oh, Very Sexy said, I made a braided rug out of socks. Wow. Okay. I've seen people make strips of fabric and turn that into their rugs, but I've not tried it. And there's also, you can do rag weaving for rugs too. I have a friend who does that. Sharon Beatty says, I think the hair vests that peasants used to wear were known to itch. It depends, you know, if you had to give up the best of your fleeces, your lamb fleeces to your lord, yeah, they probably would have been itchier. But they might have had a better underclothing too, and keep the heavier clothes on the outside, so it just depends. So Very Sexy says, you cut them into loops, chain them together, and then braid them. Oh, out of the socks. Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so back to feeling. So you have the softness and how it feels. How thick is the yarn? Because go back again, you know, there's going to be a little bit of texture difference between a really thick yarn and a really thin yarn, and that will make something bumpier. And the what it's made out of, like cotton yarns, are usually have a harder texture than the wool yarns, which is usually a little bit smoother across the top. As far as feeling how the feel of working with your textiles, if you've been, oh, this one came off of that one, I'll just catch the loops again. If you've been working for hours and hours and hours, I can only knit for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, or my hands hurt because I'm a former programmer, and it hurts down in here. So your hands get tired, your fingers get tired, your hands get tired. If your garment is heavy, it can hurt your hands. Another it just depends. This is part of why I do a lot of small projects, because I can't hold heavy sweater weight things. Some of my friends who are also former programmers that do sweaters, they rest their arms on pillows and rest their work that way. So Darth Nicholas says, so last night I was reading The Dark Crystal, and there's a part that totally sounds like they're describing, ooh, null binding made me think of your stream, because I knew nothing about that until I watched that. Cool, they may have been. It's historically done, so they may have carried over into The Dark Crystal. Sharon Beatty says, sorry, I gotta go. I'm gonna watch the recording of this. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending, Sharon. Question redeemed. I usually think of wool yarn as being really chunky. I have a character who wears a headscarf as part of his culture. They are traditionally woolen, but wanted this to be softer and finer. Could wool yarn be fine? Yes, very fine. Or is there a good suggestion for a different fiber that might be better? It depends on where your character is from. If they live in a desert, it may be better to have a cotton yarn. But knitting cotton yarns, it's usually not soft, okay? That would be a woven thing for it to be softer. Wool can be very light. I don't have any examples, but I have a couple shawls that are made out of wool or alpaca, and they're light and fluffy and drapey, and they're not that hot. So it just depends on where they're at as far as climate goes. If you look at some of the desert dwelling tribes, they have quite a bit of stuff on, and that's to protect against the differences in temperature, and it's also to protect against the dust from like dust storms and things. So it just depends on what you want. And I'm not a nomadic desert culture really knowledgeable. I've just seen a lot of what they have, and they do some really incredible work. It's usually not knitting. It's going to be weaving, as you know, weaving strips of fabric, or it could be bands for like straps for their, you know, camel harnesses and leashes and stuff. So it just depends on what you want. We talked about the texture of the thing. Then also depending on how you knit it, I showed you guys the picture out of the Celtic collection one where they have the cables. Those are, oh, where's another one? Oh, there's a cabled one. That's the same one. She gave you guys a different one. It's kind of hard to see this, but she's got an amazing, there's so much texture there, and that's all raised, and so you can feel the texture on the sweater. You can feel the texture of these little squares. So each different type of knitting will have a different texture. The person who makes this headscarf would probably have access to a lot of different fibers. Thanks, very helpful. Okay, well, find what that works best for their climate, and you should be good to go. So a lot of yarns today, modern yarns we'll see are cotton or a cotton blend, acrylic, wool. But again, wool can be really super soft if it's like merino or softer than that, but it also pills more. It could be made of goat fibers, llama, alpaca, dog, cat, just about anything. There's somebody I knew was spinning silver fox. I personally can't spin that because I know the animal dies but they're used for another purpose, but I still I don't want to use a fiber that an animal dies with. That's my personal preference. There's milk fibers, which turn out to be a lot like silk, linen, silk. Silk is amazing to spin and to knit with. It catches on every little bit of dry skin you have, but there's a cool feeling to it. It's a lot like linen, and it's really nice that way. It's cool, and it feels expensive. There's a reason it's expensive. So that's the feel and the sight, and then again the smell, depending on, similar to null binding, depending on the time and period you have. If they had lanolin in the oil, especially for like the cabled fishermen's sweaters, they might have some lanolin in, and you might smell sheep there. You know, it's usually not going to be a bad smell because they've washed the ick out of it. Any urine or feces they've washed out of the fleece, but they might leave the lanolin in there. So, but it's great for weatherproofing, especially for fishermen's sweaters. The type of fiber in the yarn, they smell slightly different. Now, granted, you know, today you're gonna smell the factory, or whatever they made it smell like. But if your character pulled cotton directly out of the cotton field, it'll smell like the cotton field. Or if it's fresh sheared off the sheep, and it just depends on what the fiber is. Then there was the dyes, again, a common ingredient in dyes, and Janet talked about this, was urine, which is really gross, but it helped the fabric stay wet and concentrate the dye in the dye vats so that you could get more vibrant colors. Your needles, if they were freshly made, might have a smell, so it just depends on what you're making. Then the sounds are going to be very different from knitting and knot binding. Let's see if I can, I have this through there, that's okay, I'll work around it. See if I can put this up to the microphone so you guys can hear it. Okay, so the wooden ones are very quiet. You heard the clicking of the plastic on my keyboard more than the knit, but you can hear these metal ones a little bit, and they make more of a sound. Metal ones were pretty popular up until a couple years ago when we started using more wood ones again. They're very slippery. Okay, let's see, where am I at? Have to figure out what I'm working on here. This is what I get for picking up a project midstream and not remembering where I was. So, I'm hearing the tink down here. I don't know if you can see it, but the needles hitting themselves down below more than up top. But if you have bigger needles, they will click more. So it depends on the material, but usually there'll be this click or this clink as depending on what type of material you have. You have the sound of the yarn ball. I can find. Sometimes it makes a sound. I don't know if you could hear it. I could hear it, but there's a swoosh as far as pulling that out. Oh, we got some checks here. Stretch check. Okay. Stretch. Thank you. Save check. Oh, you were working? I'm so sorry. I'm glad. Do definitely, if you're working on something, save it. The nighttime will be the end with the new update, happily. So happy about that. Okay. Late greetings all. Hi Kahuna. We're working on knitting today and talking about how we can work that into our worlds. The autosave will be an interesting thing. I'm wondering how that'll work on already created pages. Is, you know, will you have to click it to make it go live? I'm horribly curious as to how this will work. So more sounds. As far as if you have a round ball, I usually do make my yarn into a center pull, but if I have a round ball, it'll roll around on the floor and it'll clunk into things. Or you can have it in what's called a yarn bowl, and it's got a little hook that you have the yarn come through, so it stays put and it doesn't run all over your floor. Then there'll be the snip of the scissors as you cut the yarn. So those are some of the sounds you'll hear. Oh, hey, wow, we're filling this all up. As far as fiction books goes, I've got a listing here. Let's see if I can share it. I just looked up knitting fiction books on Goodreads, and a lot of them are going to be murder mysteries along with knitting, so it's kind of fun. I have read the Maggie Sefton's books, starting with Knit One, Kill Two, and I've read several of those. They're fun. But it is nice to see knitting being very popular in literature. In some cases, it was not as well looked upon if you had to make your own garments because you weren't rich. But it depends on the time period. But the modern ones, it's just really fun. There's usually a knitting group, and they gab and they chat and they knit together. It's very much a communal experience. So.